Another week, another video where I'm gonna say it's probably gonna be a short video, and then it ends up not being a short video because that's just kind of the way these things go, apparently. That being said, this week I actually ended up doing relatively little on the game. Mostly because the things that I did do just took a lot of time and some things didn't really work out, and I just generally didn't have a lot of time to work on the game this week. I did have, number one, a new microphone, partly for these videos, partly for my other channel, and partly because this microphone that I was using before just was really like, it doesn't matter. I also, which we'll get into in a moment, bought a drawing tablet, which, again, we'll get to that in a moment. I did really only two things this week. Well, some have like more parts to it, but I think this week I've only put in like 10 to 12 hours of work, and a lot of that was trial and error and things that I actually ended up throwing away because they didn't work very well. So let's go over those real quick. I started making a menu. I spent quite a lot of time making like a main menu because I am working towards a first test build that I can send out to people. And for that, obviously, it's very nice if people can select the level they need to play. Because I have the level that I've actually been developing, and that's like the most completed, and well, it's nowhere near completed, but it's actually like, it is something. And then I also have the level that I just throw new mechanics into to test out in a vacuum, unrelated to like anything else in that level. Just, does this mechanic work? How does it work? Do I need to tune it? I have a prototype level for that, which doesn't have any fancy graphics. It's all literally just like white blocks. You've seen a couple of shots of it in previous devlogs. I want to make that playable for the test players as well. I actually got the idea from a friend to, in the final game, maybe like when you 100% that game, you unlock that level. I think that's a really, really fun idea, so I'm probably going to end up doing that. And then I want to have a level where you can just free roam and have the 3D movement system, because both of those other levels have the hallway movement system. The movement system is the same, it's mostly the camera, which is different. A on rails behind the character camera versus a controllable camera, which does influence the way you walk and move around quite a bit. So those three options I want to have for players when they get the first test build, so that they don't have to just go through the one level, and it's a little bit more of a basic-ish game. It turns out making menus, it's real tricky. I need to look up some videos specifically for it. I know the basics of like how to put together a widget and put programming behind pressing a button. Right now, the menus work. Well, one of the menus works. The other menu just refuses to work. And it only works through mouse input, but most of the game is not going to be played through using a mouse because it's a platforming game, so it's probably going to be mostly played with a controller, like the PlayStation controller, or Xbox controller, or fucking Steam controller if you have one. I hope that it works. I don't even know if that'll work, honestly. It might not. I don't care. Nobody uses that thing. I need to make a menu that's navigable with a controller rather than with clicking a mouse, and something that just works with every game mode. There's probably something to do with the game mode itself, where if you finish the level, I also made a end of level thing. It's just like, at the moment, a placeholder asset of a cone with 3 little cones floating around it, just so it's a little animated, but it's really like, if I say placeholder, you'll think, oh, it's a temporary model. No. It's literally just like a shape. But when you get close to it, it works the same as the checkpoints. It checks whether or not you're in the collision that I put around it. Then when you press a button, it should disable the control for the character, just pause the level, potentially even, and open the menu that lets you replay the level or go back to the main menu. That menu might end up not being used in the main game, because obviously you just get thrown back into the overworld, but there isn't any overworld right now. I could just, instead of making menus, just make an overworld map, and that's actually not a bad idea. I'm literally coming up with this as we go right now. That's not a bad idea. Instead of making a main menu screen, I could just make the 3D like free roaming playground, just have two like level portals and just skip the menu step altogether. That would probably actually be better, because that's more going to be how it's going to be like in the final game. And together with the fact that I've lost years of my life trying to get these menus to work, and I haven't looked up any tutorials for them yet. I probably should anyway, because I am not particularly strong with like the heads-up displays and widget functions in Unreal at the moment. So, but I do think that there's something to be said about making those level portals in another level. Because at the moment I'm actually working on something that's not going to be used in the final game. I'm making a object, I'm making programming just for prototype builds, which seems ridiculous, knowing that I'm gonna throw it away later. So I'm probably going to end up doing that. I had this idea live on video. I hadn't considered that before. Anyway, going into what I spent most of... oh no, I have some technical things as well. I fixed the AI, the chasing AI problem, where it would go to the location that you were at when it started its chase sequence, and then it just wouldn't progress with the behavior tree. The way I fix it is making, in the project settings, making the nav mesh, the navigation mesh that gets generated, dynamic, meaning that it updates like every frame, every couple of frames. I don't exactly know how it works, but it updates the navigation mesh, which is useful if you have a nav mesh with like things moving around in it, so that the AI can see, oh, wait a second, right now there's a block in front of me, so I can't use that, because otherwise it only generates that nav mesh when loading this stage. That shouldn't have made a difference in my case, because it's, again, literally just that one level where it has an issue and there's no moving parts to any of this. So there's really no reason that this should have fixed the issue, but it did. So that issue is fixed. I'm still going to probably not include the AI chasing enemies in this level, because I've now replaced them with something else, which we'll get to in a moment. Had I not done that, I probably would have actually had a lot more done this week, but I did decide to do that, and I think this is a more fun way to do it. The thing I talked about last week is the enemies that fly up and down. I might have already implemented those in the game last week, I'm not entirely sure, but those are right now the replacement for the chasing enemies, and I think they're a lot more satisfying, at least in this context, to use. I have the basic shape of the AI behavior tree worked out. I'll finish it once I get to a level where I'm thinking, yeah, this is where I want to use it. So that's just going to like be put on a shelf, gather some dust, and maybe at some point I'll pick it back up. Finish the checkpoint system, because one very important thing about the checkpoint system is that you could re-trigger the checkpoint. So you could trigger the checkpoint, go get some coins, go back if you wanted to, and re-trigger the checkpoint again to save you collecting those coins. And that's obviously like an exploit that we don't want. So right now, when you trigger a checkpoint, it removes the box, it adds the checkpoints to the list of like collected coins and destroyed actors. And then upon loading, it doesn't remove the checkpoint itself, because I want the checkpoint to still visually be there. It just removes the collision box that checks whether or not you're on range. Meaning that if that collision box isn't there, you're never going to be in range and you can't actually trigger the checkpoints again. So that's a very simple but elegant solution to being able to not trigger the checkpoints ever again after having triggered it once. Now, moving on to some graphical stuff, because all of this was only like 2 or 3 days. The rest of the week was spent making a model. And it was... I don't have like a lot of footage recording of this, because a lot of this I was just playing around and ended up like working on it for an hour. But in general, I think I spent about 10 or so hours of this week's work. Maybe I spent about 15 in total working on the game in total, but I spent about 10 hours working on this specific model. I learned a lot. I've improved a lot as a 3D artist already because of this one model. I have improved a bit as an animator, I can tell, from this model, because I am, frankly, like, I am not a good animator at all. Like, there's a lot of things that I can do relatively well. There's a lot of things that I can do at an acceptable level. Animation is generally not one of them. Most of the times I make animations, especially if they have to be like organic animations, they end up feeling very stiff. If it's very robotic and very like mechanical, those animations I can do because that is very, very easy to make. Making a robot arm that goes beep, boop, is very easy. Making a person that just like waves like this is a little bit harder. I ended up making a dragon. Like a shadowy, dark dragon. It's very much probably a temporary model. Maybe it's gonna keep around. Again, I spent a lot of time into it, so kind of don't want to throw it away at a later stage, but maybe I'll have to. He looks a little derpy. He doesn't look very intimidating. I am looking into, well, I'm not looking into it yet, but I'm thinking about when I'm putting in the game, I want to have him emit some kind of like mist-like particles. I don't know how heavy that's going to be on like processing power, if there's a lot of them. There's not going to be a lot of them in the level or on screen at any given time though. So that should in theory be fine, I hope. Partly because I want the enemies all to have this like mystical, otherworldly darkness feeling. And partly to just like conceal the less amazing parts of the model. Some of the parts of the model are very, very nice. Some of them are less nice. I tried a new modeling technique, making use of the skin modifier in Blender just to like make the basic shape and skeleton of it. Not literally like the armature, just like the basic shape, and then used sculpting to make the rest of the model. And that's where this thing, I don't know if the USB cable is long enough. It is kind of, that's where this thing comes in. I bought this, and this thing saves my fucking life when making models, I can tell you that much. Because, obviously for sculpting, but also for things like weight and texture painting. I haven't done any texture painting with it, but especially for the weight painting that I've done for this armature. Because the automatic weights, they weren't always very great for this model. Specifically for things like the tail. The way Blender does automatic weights, the cutoff points are very, very harsh. And if you want something like a more organic shape, which just like bends and doesn't like fold, I like the tail for the dragon. You want that weight painting to be more gradual. And for that, you need to manually go over it. But if you use a mouse, it's either you go 100% in and the value you've set your weight painting to, whether that be anything between 0 and 1, or you're not clicking. This thing right here has 2000 pressure levels, so I can press just a little harder and just give it a little bit more weight to that specific point. I spent most of my Wednesday evening getting used to this, and by now I feel pretty comfortable using this to sculpt and weight paint with. So it's actually a very easy adjustment period, turns out. I'll show you what I made the dragon look like before I got this tablet, right? You can probably see that on screen right now. It's probably just a screenshot because I don't think I have any particular good video of it. And then like after like a couple of hours of work with this thing, it looks a lot better. It mostly just got a jawline, admittedly, but it looks a lot better in my opinion. Still, it's a little derpy. It's not very intimidating, as I've said, but it's better than nothing, and I think this is usable. The animation, it's probably playing on screen right now. It's a looped animation. The loop point specifically for the like the neck looking around. It's very obvious. Like it's really obvious. I'm not going to bother too much with that right now. I'll get back into like making this animation in general better later on. But for right now, it does its job. And I think this dragon for this prototype, like test build, is done. I'm not going to do any like texturing for it at the moment. It's just going to be like solid colors. Again, it's all for a test build. And I want to move on with developing that. So I need to make at least one more type of enemy. That's the walking enemy. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do with that. I also want to make a shadowy beast. The one thing that I figured out while test playing for myself is that you want these enemies to be particularly like wide. You want the X and Y axes to be very long compared to how high they are. Because at the moment, I'm using the default like mannequin that Unreal comes with, and those are just humanoid shaped. And it turns out humans are actually like, they're very thin from a top perspective, and the way you kill the enemies is like Mario, for instance, does, and most platformers do, because that's how Mario does it, is jumping on top of them. Jumping on top of something that's very thin is very finicky and very annoying. So you want the enemies to be a little bit more square. So I'm thinking for the walking enemy, I probably want something that is that walks on 4 legs rather than 2, just to like make that happen. So it's probably going to be some kind of dog-like shadow beast. I'm going to make all of the enemies throughout the entire game consistent, number 1, because that saves me a hell of a lot of time in modeling, and I can just like get a story reason for it. The thing I'm thinking right now is that my character, as I have it right now, the design is very much based on Vivi from Final Fantasy IX, I want to say. I know mostly from Kingdom Hearts. And it's a very mysterious, like magical looking character. So the thing I'm thinking right now is the character I have is like a dark magic mage, but like a generally good person. And something goes wrong and he accidentally unleashes these shadow monsters across the world, and you have to go through a couple of different like locations to get rid of them. Which also ties into my idea of I want to have a collectible for killing all of the enemies within every single level, because that's actually the goal you're going for. You're going to kill the things that you've accidentally created. And as such, I want them to have some kind of relatability to each other and to the main character as well. That, and maybe I will like add some things to certain versions, but the general, like the dragon, for instance, right? In the editing level right now, it's just going to be there as it is. I have another level which plays a lot with color. So maybe I'm going to make a grayscale version of the textures so that it fits in with the grayscale version of that level. And then maybe when I have the red version of that level, I'll just make the dragon entirely red. Things like that, right? So mostly in texturing work, it might be different. So that they still do feel somewhat unique from world to world, but still are the same creatures. So that's what I'm thinking right now. Anyway, I don't know if I'm going to go through with that, but that's going to save me a lot of headaches. So I think that means that we're mostly done for the prototype test build. Thing being, today is the 6th. I'm recording this on the day it goes up. And starting on the 8th, going all the way to the 22nd, I'll be working with somebody else on a game jam game, which means that there's probably not going to be a hell of a lot of time dedicated to this project over the next 2 weeks. I'm going to try to fit in some amount of work, maybe in like level designing the portal room that I just talked about, which I just convinced myself as we go through this video that I'm going to go and make it that way. So maybe I can make that, and maybe I can like get started on the model for something. Or generally, I don't expect to make a lot of progress on this game until after the 22nd. Meaning that the prototype build that I actually wanted to have ready to send out to people at the start of November is going to be finished roughly around the end of November instead. So a bit of a month of a delay there. That being said, if you do want to be up to date with that, do join the Discord down below in the description. I have a channel specifically for beta testers there. Just when you join, shoot me a message saying, hey, I would like to be included in the game testers, and I'll give you access to the channel, and we can just talk, and I'll post updates about it also in there. So that is something that you very much should look into doing. For right now, I think that's everything I have for this week. It's actually a shorter video. Holy shit! We're 22 minutes in. It's not actually a 30-minute video for once. It's a miracle. That's what you get when you don't do a lot of work. So all that and more. Next week we'll be back. I'll probably talk a little bit about the Game Jam game as well next week. But mostly it's going to stick to my progress with this very game, which I still need to name, by the way. I don't know if I talked about this in the last devlog or the one before, or at all. The game doesn't have a name, and obviously there is not a lot of game to give a name to, but at some point I'm going to need to come up with a name. So that is certainly something that I would also love to get suggestions of. I'll see you back next week. Bye.